Hello and welcome to On the Marie Curie Couch, the podcast that aims to break down taboos and start open, honest conversations about death and dying. I'm Jason Davidson. I'm a social worker by profession and I've worked in palliative care, hospice care and bereavement support services for more than a decade. Each episode, we speak to a well-known guest to find out how they feel about their own mortality and how their personal experience of bereavement has shaped the way they live their life. Today, I'm on the Marie Curie couch with Sir Michael Palin. Michael is a comedian, actor, writer, and TV presenter. Best known as a member of the legendary comedy troupe Monty Python, he wrote and appeared in its series Monty Python's Flying Circus, as well as the group's films, including Monty Python and the Holy Grail and Life of Brian. Alongside continued work in comedy and film, Michael's made numerous travel documentaries with the BBC and is a prolific author, publishing travel books, diaries, novels, and children's books. In 2013, he was awarded the BAFTA Fellowship and received a Knighthood in 2019. Michael Palin, welcome to On the Marie Curie Couch.
Thank you, Jason.
How are you?
I'm okay, yeah. It's a lovely day, and I'm feeling fairly balanced in my life at the moment, which has not been the case recently so much after the death of my wife 2 years ago, but I would say, I feel pretty good about life at the moment.
Okay, that's good to hear. Thank you. And you just mentioned the death of your wife there. And as you know, this podcast, one of our aims is to encourage conversations around death and dying and bereavement. And I wonder if we could begin today by you talking to me about your wife's death and maybe how she died and when she died.
Well, my wife had been ill she'd been in pain for about 5 or 6 years following a knee replacement, which we don't know what happened, but anyway, she didn't totally recover from that. There was some nerve pain, and that kept going, and I think that reduced her sort of her ability to enjoy life and to get about, but it was bearable. But then a number of different things were diagnosed, and she had some problems with her heart, and the pain and the gradual sort of withdrawal from life was something which I think she found very, very difficult, because she was a gregarious person and full of fun and all that. And then she had various operations to try and alleviate this pain, which started in her knee. And in the end, she was diagnosed with renal failure, with kidney failure. And that meant going into dialysis. And we couldn't have dialysis at home. She decided to have it. We were quite close to the place down near St Pancras where the dialysis took place. The whole system was very inefficient. The people who collected her were sometimes an hour late, sometimes didn't turn up. The people who brought her back, it was a very, very difficult period for her and for all of us, really. And then she got pneumonia. This was about 2 years and a couple of months ago. Went into hospital at the Royal Free, had a pretty bad experience there. I mean, these things happen in hospital, but she was in a ward where somebody just talked and screamed all day and all night. Anyway, as soon as she got better, we got her a place wonderfully at Eden Hall Hospice, run by Marie Curie. And that was just so completely wonderful. It absolutely changed our feelings. I mean, I know it's really all about Helen, but it's also about the family and everybody else. And she was so well looked after there. And she had a very difficult time. She was still in pain for various reasons. And in the end, the dialysis was sort of actually killing her rather than keeping her alive. It was so difficult for her to get down there. So she made the decision to stop the dialysis, and she died about 2 weeks later in Eden Hall. And I have to say, which partly why I was really keen to do this podcast today, the service there was absolutely wonderful. And she couldn't have had a better last few days of her life. She was happier than I've seen her for 6 years, to be honest.
Thank you. And I think, as you've just mentioned there, that, I mean, it does impact everyone, doesn't it? It does impact the whole family and everybody who's around the person, who's watching them, who's supporting them, loving them. And I think palliative care is not just about the individual, but it's about all those who are significant around them as well. And so I think what you're describing, that difference between what your wife and you all received, the kind of care you received in the hospital versus what you might receive in a hospice, is often very different. And people will say, like what you've just said, that, yeah, I mean, just that difference came at it.
Yes.
And it was a great relief.
Yes, I mean, it was a difficult time for all of us because, we knew that she didn't have long to live when she went obviously into the palliative care at Eden Hall. So there's that, which you have to get used to. But the circumstances in which she was looked after made that whole awful sort of situation so much more bearable. I mean, it's partly just little things like at the hospice, they allowed visitors in almost any time. My and Helen's grandchildren, who were then sort of about 5 and 3, were allowed to come in. We were all around her bedside. She loved that. And that was, it was just sort of celebrating really with her, despite the fact there was really nothing to celebrate. She was going to die. But on the other hand, it was the fact that she could for a moment look back and say, this is the right thing to do. Whatever's going to happen now is the right thing. And I know that my children think that, and my grandchildren think that. And I rang around all her friends, and they were able to ring her at the hospital. It was difficult for them. A lot of them are very, very emotional. But I think everybody, I talked to them later, they said it was so good that they had that chance to speak to her and that everything was done to try and, keep her sort of communicating with all those people and all those friends. So it was, I mean, closure is a word which is much, much overused, but it did have a feeling of closure. And almost everybody she wanted to talk to in those last weeks, the last sort of 4 or 5 days, I suppose, she was able to talk to, and they were able to come and see her. And just, it was that accessibility that was so brilliant about Eden Hall.
I think the accessibility, but I think also by the sounds of it, I can hear for Helen that decision to stop having treatment. And am I right to use the word sort of maybe more of an acceptance of what was happening and that it was the end? And so is there a sort of freeing up there, if you like, to be able to do some of that closure, some of them conversations?
Yes, absolutely. I think in a way we were in a very lucky and privileged position, really. Helen was she was a very able person. She was pragmatic. She understood health matters very, very well. And once she had decided that she just couldn't bear to do any more dialysis, that was it, really. She had decided, everybody around her agreed and knew why she'd taken that decision. But it also meant that we did have this little period to share the approach of death. And I think a lot of people don't have that at all. Death happens suddenly out of the blue. I mean, that's why I feel very, very fortunate that we had that time. And it wasn't just a matter of her suddenly here one moment, gone the next. And I mean, there was a sort of, I don't know, it's an odd word, but there's a kind of harmony about what happened in those last few days. It was like she was the center of it, but everybody was tuned into it because of her decision.
Well, I guess one of the privileges as well, I think in my experience of having worked in hospice care for many years and worked with people who are dying, is if they can have that opportunity, and you're talking about harmony, but I mean, if they can have the opportunity to orchestrate what's happening as well, then I think that does definitely make a difference. There's something about being able to make your own choices and decisions about your own death.
I think that's absolutely right. I think in a way, she was empowered by that decision. And in a way, for several, well, certainly for the previous 2 years when she'd been in considerable pain, she wasn't really able to do anything. And I mean, well, she was very well looked after, and we had sort of people come in and see her and all that. The doctors and nurses were pretty good. But, she was kind of the victim of illness and ill health. And there was no way she could sort of make it better. She just would go out, we'd go and see people, and she'd sort of let people do examinations and all that and try and find out what it was. But that wasn't the same thing as her deciding, this is something that only I can do, and I made this decision. So it was empowering for her, and it was good to see. I mean, there were just times then, little glances and things. I didn't say an awful lot. It was just, I could just tell she was, in a way, at peace.
And you, of course, knew each other very well. You'd been together for a very, very long time.
Yeah. We'd been together, we worked out, I think it was out 64 years or something like that. We'd met on holiday, in 1959. I was about 16 at the time, and it was a holiday romance that sort of built up to a sort of very long marriage. So we were joined at the hip in terms of our lives. She was there all the time. She knew me obviously better than anybody else. And we'd sort of built up a communication between the two of us, which was just sort of worked extremely well. And it could weather good times and bad times. But there was never a feeling that, we perhaps ought to be with somebody else. It was always the feeling that the two of us were just a unit, as simple as that. And I didn't really realize until after she died that was the difficult thing. That was half of your life gone. And not just for me, but for others. Instead of, you and Helen must come round and have so we must go and have a cafe, have a pizza or something like that. It was, you must come round and have a pizza. And that was odd. And it still is odd, actually. I live in the house now, I live on my own, which is fine. And yet, I know that it's just Michael and Helen were just, as I say, this unit. And so I'm now getting used to the fact it's just Michael and I, and I say about, we've got in our garden this, that, or the other. Oh, we have 2 grandchildren, or this, that, and the other, as though she's still here. I still use the we. It's why I find it very difficult to just say, I have. I find it almost impossible. I have to use the royal we.
Yeah. And why not?
Yeah. I mean, it's a good thing, really. But there we go.
So it's been 2 years, Michael, since Helen died, around about 2 years, has it?
Yes, yeah, just over 2 years.
So you've just touched there on grief and some of your experience of that. I just wondered whether you were able to talk a bit more about grief in how that's been for you over the last 2 years. How was it in the earlier weeks and months after Helen first died? And is there anything that comes to mind that you think's been particularly helpful for you in your grief?
Well, I think what was most helpful was that I was very fortunate enough to be surrounded by a family, a close family. And, Helen and I had 3 children. We had 4 grandchildren. They all live nearby and were able to come to, well, first of all, really in the last days of her life, were easily able to get to Eden Hall up in Hampstead. And then immediately afterwards, they my daughter's only sort of 10 or 15 minutes away. They were all able to come to the house. So there's a feeling that we took the loss in together. It was a group thing. And I mean, that helped enormously. Not just that they were sort of, I knew that they felt the grief that I felt, but that they would sort of understand how I was taking it in, because they knew, they'd known her for over many, many years, and they knew about our relationship and how it worked and all that. So they knew the little shorthand of our relationship, and they knew what would go missing once one wasn't there. And that's quite a subtle thing. So that was very, very important. And otherwise, my own feelings were, to start with, which I know many families I go through, which is, there's an awful lot of bureaucracy that goes on after death. Enormous amount of things papers have to be signed, people in touch with, electricity suppliers, shops that she has an account with and all that sort of thing. Her driving license has to be dealt with, a huge amount of stuff, which actually you become very practical and pragmatic about the whole situation for a few days. And that staunches the grief. But there was one thing that happened, which I thought was very beautiful, actually. I went into Camden Registry Office to register Helen's death. That's another thing, another bit of paper you have to have. How many copies will you need? Well, you've got to have one for the solicitor, you've got to have one for the parking department and all that. But I went in, I was standing there at the reception and told them I was coming in to register Helen's death. And there was a couple next to me, and they had a very, very tiny little baby slung around. The man had slung on his chest, a tiny little face. And I thought this was just wonderful because, one's in and out. One's going out, making room for another one. And it was rather nice that. And we exchanged addresses and we still sort of keep in touch. So I think of Clara, the little girl, as being sort of not in the embodiment of Helen, but the one who took her place. And that was a nice thing. So, there are all these little moments of heightened feelings. And there are times when you feel it's all business, you've just got to get on with it. But then there are times when you come back home and there's nobody sitting in the chair in which they've been sitting for the last few years or whatever. No one to hear that little bit of gossip you've got about somebody doing something. I mean, I'd love to have told Helen about meeting this couple with their little baby and all that. She'd have loved that. So, it was a mixture of ups and downs. And I wrote in my diary, I think I wrote some regret and loss are like dodging fire on a battlefield. One moment you're okay, and then suddenly, right in front of you, something comes up, someone says something, or you were asked something by someone who doesn't know she's died, and that's again, that's always difficult. Anyway, we coped, and I decided that you had to celebrate Helen. That was a good thing, really. I mean, I think probably in many cases people die and are not celebrated particularly. They die alone or forgotten. I mean, that must be absolutely dreadful. But anyway, we had had a funeral for family and all that, and very close friends. And again, just little things. We had a funeral company who were not the big company, big local company with all the men in black and top hats, but a guy who's much more relaxed about it. And it just made it much more easy for all of us to sort of get as close as we could to Helen. And I can remember when the hearse drew up at the place where she was to be cremated, they opened the back, and my two little youngest grandchildren had to explain, there she is. And they went and sort of, able to sort of touch the coffin, not in a sort of dramatic way. It was just really nice that they'd made it that informal, and that made it much, much closer. So I don't feel in the whole process of Helen's death and what happened afterwards that we missed many moments of being able to celebrate her life, which is a good thing. So and we then had a meeting, well, a celebration really at the local church for local people in the area. She knew the area very well. We lived here together for 58 years, and about 130 people turned out. It was lovely, and people reminiscences. And then we had a third gathering for all the friends, people abroad and everywhere. Anyone wanted to come at Bart's Hospital because my son William was in charge of a big restoration there and was able to get us the Great Hall at Bart's. And we had music and we had tributes and all the children spoke, and it was lovely. So in many ways, I don't feel that, I missed opportunities to remember her and for the family to remember her and have access to the whole process, which I think made, in this particular case, a huge difference. Because we kept saying, as I keep saying, what would Helen have thought, at this moment? We always, I don't talk to her all the time, but I do come into the house and say something, which, well, I know there's nobody there, because I just know how she would react. And sometimes it's quite wonderful, it's like sort of silly things. There was one hand for making scrambled eggs. the saucepan, which she thought we should throw away. And I said, no, it's all right. And I'm still using it. Every time I make scrambled eggs, I hear her saying, you're not still using that, for goodness sake. So things like that are good. Her attitude lives on, and it lives on in the whole family, which is nice.
And keeps her there and keeps her close and keeps her in the home and all of those things.
Oh, yeah. I mean, absolutely. And we always, well, she died May the 2nd, and my birthday, my 80th birthday, is on May the 5th. So what we do now, we have a combined sort of celebration. We make it the one usually on May the 3rd, something like that, between the two. So remember Helen, and, they produce a cake and all that. We have the birthday celebrations. So, I mean, I keep thinking really, because I know of other people who've had different circumstances, how incredibly lucky I am to have had the family. And I mean, it's also because of Helen, the way she was and her attitude. She was very open to people. She gave very good advice to people. People came to her for advice, especially on medical things and all that. So there's no reason not to remember her. She lived a very good life.
Marie Curie's mission is to close the gap in end-of-life care. We're here for anyone with an illness they're likely to die from, and those close to them. Whatever the illness, wherever you are, we're with you to the end. Find out more at mariecurie.org.uk.
I just wanted to comment on the when you went to register Helen's death and that really beautiful story about how at that time when you're so close to it, you're submerged in it, you know, in the kind of, you're so close to death, into the circle of life. And then you get to see this baby and have this connection with this couple. It is a really beautiful story, Michael.
Yeah, very nice that. Grief is one of those things that does it, and it does hit you very powerfully at certain moments, sometimes when you absolutely least expect it. But I've never hidden it. I've talked to people about it, but they've sort of, family who I see all the time, have been through that experience. They're kind of sharing it. We don't have to say everything about missing her and all that sort of thing. But there are just one or two times when, I can remember we just went on holiday in France, sort of 3 months after she died, and my daughter was there as well. She's 50 now. She was 48 nearly, and I don't know, something had gone wrong. She sort of had dropped a cup off the table, it broke or something like that, and I just comforted her, and the two of us ended up in floods of tears, and it was tears not for the cup. So those things do come out every now and then, which is great. I'm glad that there's no sort of absolute pattern to it. If you could read a book and say, well, on day 3, you're going to feel this, on day 4, you're going to feel that. It's all individual. It's all about you, really.
And I think you can have those moments, can't you, where, with the broken cup, but actually what that turned out to be was just a moment of deep grief with your daughter where you could embrace and support each other, which is really beautiful. And then, as you describe as well, which I know people listening to this who are grieving right now, this will resonate with them too, is that you have those moments where it can just hit you completely out of the blue, unexpected. You're in a supermarket or anything can trigger it.
Yeah, you read something, or actually one of the worst things for me was sort of listening to music, which we had both listened to together. And, we were both around about the same time. I remember the first record she gave me was I Want to Hold Your Hand by the Beatles. And so we were all that. So, if I hear that played, that starts things off. So musical associations, food sometimes, shared meals. We go to a place, this is really good. Helen, what do you think? Little things like that. But the great thing is that I always feel guided by her because, 64 years of knowing somebody, you just share so much, and so much of you is in them, and vice versa. And because we had we were lucky, we had a good marriage and children and all that, I feel that we can sort of talk to each other, if you know what I mean. and we still sort of understand each other. And there's not a day goes by when I don't think about her in some shape or form. And now, one's got through the grieving, which is sometimes very personal, very hard. And then you come a general grieving amongst friends and all that. And we'll go out and we'll have a meal with friends who the last time I would have been there with Helen. And it's not miserable. It's people say, oh, well, it says, how are you feeling? I say what I'm saying to you now. And that sort of group thing seems to help a lot because there's a lot of other people's grief involved, not just mine. And I'm very much aware that she had a group of school friends. Well, she was at college in Froebel Institute, learning to be a teacher, about a couple of years before we married. And a little group of them always get together. And I hear from them now, that they really miss her. That's something that's their grief. And I have to remember that there's other people grieving out there. And I try and keep in touch. And on their birthday and things like that, a small number of people ring up who are very close to her and very close friends. And I'm glad that they can do that. I think there'll be nothing worse than sort of it being forgotten or pushed under the carpet or people feeling embarrassed about showing their emotions. I say, well, you show it, let it all out. I wrote down here a wonderful quote from Shakespeare that helped me at the time, which reads, "Give sorrow words. The grief that does not speak whispers the overfraught heart and bids it break." So there we are. Shakespeare knew. Talk about it.
Yeah. And I think, talk about it, share stories of the person. It's all those continuing bonds, isn't it? That kind of that continuing bond with Helen for you. And also, we often talk about this on this podcast, but everybody will have a different experience of grief as well, even people in the same family. You've all lost the same person, but you will all have a different experience of grief because it's unique to the relationship that each person had with the individual.
Yeah.
We know the grief's unique to the relationship you had. And so that's why it's different, because sometimes people will say, oh, well, siblings who've lost a parent might say, well, how's he feeling like that and I'm feeling like this? And it's like, well, you all had different relationships with mum, and so therefore your grief will be different as well.
There was one aspect which I thought worth talking to you about. The worst part of my grief really was knowing after Helen died that she wouldn't come back. I mean, I don't know if it's a common thing, but you kind of think, well, I haven't seen her for a bit, but, she'll probably be back because, all the houses are the same, where she sits are the same, I'm making the same sort of food and all that. She must walk in. It's utterly ridiculous, really, to think that. But those were the moments when I really felt the deepest grief, really, was knowing that it would be forever, and that was it.
Yeah, and that is a common experience, Michael, and a really normal part of grieving. And, how does the brain catch up, or the mind or the heart or the soul? How does it catch up when you're, as you describe, you've had 64 years together of somebody in your life, you're so deeply interconnected. How can everything catch up within weeks? It can't. So it's that finality of it, getting your head around that finality of it can take a long time.
Yes. I think you kind of fool yourself a bit too, especially in the fact that during her time at the hospice, we were all around her and it was kind of like a feeling we were all keeping her going. It wasn't, of course, like that. That's what it felt like.
Yeah.
So at the end of it, you think, well, she's suddenly not there. What are we going to do? How are we going to deal with the fact that we can't all go around and kids can't run around the bedside and I can't hand her the phone from someone who's calling from Canada who hasn't spoken to her for a while, But suddenly the door closes and that's it. And that's it forever. So to the foreverness of it was, definitely something which I experienced. But I feel better now.
But I think what you've just said as well, again, for people who are caring for a loved one who's living with a terminal illness is, that just that sometimes that wish and hope that it can continue and that it's not going to happen again. That's, I'm sure, a really common experience for people.
Well, there was another element to it, which actually about Helen was that she knew about health and all that. She could have been a doctor, I think. Anyway, she became a teacher. But there were times when she knew that she didn't want to carry on. And that was the most odd for her because she was full of life and her friends and all that. But I did just one or two times and she said, I can't do this anymore. And I think I have to remember that, really. What she was really going through long before she died. So in a sense, it was not something that she had sort of, a kind of overreaction to. She just, her illness over the last 2 years was so constant that I don't know how she managed to keep going the way she did, really.
One of the aims of this podcast is to encourage conversations around death and dying. What we know is if people have open conversations about death and dying, if people even plan for their death, that might be writing a will, it might be writing down what their wishes are should they become incapacitated or, terminally ill. And I just wondered if you ever think about your own death.
Oh, yes, I do. And I mean, the family are rather wonderful about it. Oh, I'm your age too. Quick, have you made a will? Can I be in your will? There's a little sort of bit and joking about it. And they do something rather bad, arrive late or something. Oh dear, we will still be in your will. So there's that, to that level. And yes, I do. I'm not terribly good at it. I made my will and all that. But yes, I suppose my family, my children know where to find what they need to find should I die. But in an odd way, the way they were able to deal with Helen's loss, I think they kind of know this is what happens, and I mean, I'm 82 now, which is longer than any Palin male has lived, for 200 years, something like that. But I'm reasonably fit. I keep fit and I'm working, fortunately, and doing, some quite difficult stuff, filming and all that sort of stuff. So I kind of kid myself that I'm going to be all right, just go on and on. And yet I know that I won't because you feel tired at certain times and, you're slightly unsteady as you get out of bed and you think, what's happening? Well, they're getting ready, the old car's getting a bit rusty, And I did have a heart, an open heart surgery. So I've been through problems with my heart, which, I suppose saved my life, really. So I've been through that, which I think is quite important to know that, your body is sort of vulnerable. And the older you get, the more vulnerable it is. So I actually feel, as a result of Helen's death and us, all the family experiencing it and her friends experiencing it, it's been a relief. They've been able to look at our own mortality and stare it in the face and say, well, that's going to happen, And all I worry about is that I have given the children all the passwords, my accounts and what sort of, in case I get run over by a bus, however fit you are, anything might happen. But I don't dwell on mortality. I dwell on life.
Yeah. And I think that, as you're describing just what the experience of Helen's death for the whole family is, that's kind of, for all of you to face your own mortality, but it's kind of opened that up almost for you all, as in just being open to having those conversations and or joking about it.
Yeah. Well, all my children now and our children now in their 50s, the grandchildren and all that. And I can remember when I was young and I didn't know my grandparents very well, but their deaths were all so mysterious and happened somewhere else. And we weren't invited to the funeral or anything like that. It was something you shouldn't see. And I feel really glad that all my grandchildren were able to participate and see and understand right up to the last minute that this is somebody who is, this is what happens. You get ill and eventually your body just stops working and that's it. And they know about that and they can ask any questions. And they were really very, I really encouraged this afterwards if they wanted to know, about her illness or about a grandpa. When will you die then? That sort of thing. And that's fine. Really good. I really enjoy having those conversations. So in a sense, her death released something, a tension there about death and the way it's talked about, and enabled us to deal with it and confront it as something that just does happen, and that's it.
Yeah. Just two more questions from me. One is legacy something that's important to you, as in how you'd like to be remembered?
Not particularly. I mean, I find it a difficult thing to answer because I've done a lot of stuff in the public eye, and therefore there's going to be endless books and things and films and all that around. So I feel, well, that's one thing which doesn't happen to everybody, that things you've done in your life will be remembered. People read about your stories and your travels and will watch films in which you're in and all that sort of stuff. And I feel that's quite enough. And so I'm not particularly concerned about legacy, apart from just, the knowledge that amongst our friends and our family, I have a relationship with them, which is the best possible relationship. And they can see me. I think I'm probably kind of quite like the young children in a way. I've done some comedy and all that sort of irreverent stuff and that sort of thing. And I feel like them, we're all in it together. I don't want to feel that I'm exalted on any sort of pinnacle in any shape or form. And that's always been the way. Helen was very, very strong on that, She was obviously pleased that I had been successful at certain things, but didn't go on about it a lot. And she was far more interested in whether I was going to be able to mend the tire on the car. And then we used to have these. I mean, I've done some travels, and I would ring up. I can remember ringing up from the middle of Tibetan Plateau, and extraordinarily enough, I got through. It was a very clear line, and so I'm saying, "Guess where I am?" She says, "Well, I don't care where you are. Where's the plumber's number?" And I said, "What do you mean?" "Well, the bathroom sort of boiler's gone. It's making a terrible hissing noise." And I think his number's, oh God, what was his name? Jack, Fred. He said, "Well, then, had it written down? Is it written under plumber?" And I said, "Well, probably. I just don't know." By the end of the phone call, I hadn't told her anything about Lhasa and the magnificent landscape and the fact I was, 12,000 feet up and it was glorious. So there we are. That's sort of what life is. And I think that's what death is as well, too.
Absolutely. That's brilliant. Last question. Is there anything you wanted to say on the podcast today that I've not asked you about?
No, I don't think so. I think it's been very good to talk. I think I'm just looking. I made a few notes, but there's nothing that I feel we've not talked about. But it has been good to sort of sum it all up and for you to sort of get the balance of what it's all meant to us over these last 2 years, really. And all I would say is that, I know many people. I've lost many friends over the last 2 or 3 years, and people I know, there are many survivors like myself, and at various stages they say, well, it's going to get better. And there was a time when I didn't think it was. I thought, gosh, it's just going to be poignant days and I'm going to break into tears every now and then. It does get better and it does adjust. And after 2 years now, I feel I can think of Helen now. I mean, I'm surrounded by her anyway. I have her photos. I haven't, sort of got rid of anything to do with her. So her likeness is there. The family embody what she was to them. And that's all made it much, much easier. But I think even in the most careful of circumstances where you say, I'm going to deal with death, I know what to do, I know what we're going to do. You don't at all. You absolutely don't know. It's absolutely a sucker punch. You just don't know what's going to happen or how you're going to feel or how you're going to react. And I think that's the thing that struck me most of all. It's different for everybody. And all you can hope for is that there is a chance, well, like Helen, to find a place like Eden Hall and to be treated so wonderfully there, so that the last days are not the worst days, but in the best days.
Michael Palin, thank you so much for joining me today on the Marie Curie couch. Thank you for sharing some of Helen's story, and it's been a joy to meet you.
Well, thank you very much. very nice to talk, actually. So there we go. Thank you, Jason.
So that's all for this episode of On the Marie Curie Couch. We hope it's got you thinking about matters of life and death, and perhaps starting those conversations with your own friends and family. Marie Curie's here to help. From planning ahead to coping with bereavement, you can talk through any concerns you have around the end of life with our support line team, which also includes specially trained nurses. Call us on 0800 090 2309 or search Marie Curie online. The podcast is produced and edited by Marie Curie with support from Ultimate Content. The music featured is Time Lapse by Pan Oceanic. If you've enjoyed this podcast, please do like and subscribe. Thanks for listening. Until next time, goodbye.